All right, so I'll get going on this one. Thanks for attending the Research Connections 2021-22 information webinar to make sure I know what year I'm in. This is Danny Robertson-Boersma. I'm the Programs and Peer Review Manager at SHRF, and I will be the Program Manager for this competition. So just briefly, what I'm going to talk about today is I will go over the whole about SHRF, who we are. Then I'll move into the program overview and eligibility, talk a little bit about our application process and the review process and criteria. And then finally, we'll go into those important dates and then finish off with any tips and questions and answer. When it comes to questions, please use the Q&A box and you can send those at any time. I'll either answer during, or if it's something that'll be coming up in a slide, I'll just notify and let you know. So quickly, we are Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, otherwise known as SHRF. And what we do is we fund, support, and promote the impact of health research that matters to Saskatchewan. We've been around for quite a few years now, and we just did a strategy update. We're almost complete in doing a funding update. Refresh, and if you guys have used our RMS before, you'll also know that we just did a revamp of the RMS system. So there's a lot of changes this year, and we're hoping that you guys are happy with them, and because we're pretty excited. So health research is vital to the improved health of Saskatchewan citizens through a high-performing health ecosystem with a robust culture of research and innovation. And SHRF is vital to enabling the best health research that supports Saskatchewan solutions to Saskatchewan health challenges by upholding a rigorous peer review process, measuring and sharing the impact of funded research, and collaborating with partners who can help maximize the impact of this work. So when it comes to the Research Connections program, what we do is we have this nice little graph just to kind of give an overview. So the something is we start with an idea, and then that idea gets funded, hopefully through a peer review process. There's also different avenues. You may be having got funding from us, from CIHR, any of our health partners, something like that. And then you'll go through and do your research, go through the data analysis, all of the fun stuff. From there, you'll have generated your information and you'll have all of these results. And so now we want to start sharing those results. And that's where Research Connections comes in, because we want to be, this grant wants to support you in getting this out to the individuals that need to use the information. So there's been a little bit of changes since last year we did a COVID one specifically. And then the year before that, we had updated our program to have an activities and events, and I'll go through those changes. But right now, the first thing is the purpose. What we're doing is we're aiming to increase health research relevance, usability, and uptake by supporting short-term targeted knowledge mobilization initiatives taking place in and having a practical application for Saskatchewan knowledge users. So with that, we have some new objectives, and this will, I think, be some good news for people. So our primary objective, just as before, is to facilitate the sharing of health research knowledge in non-academic mediums or settings. So before, we used to have a bit more of a traditional where you could apply to Research Connections for conferences, poster competitions, things like that. We have moved away from that with the Research Connections, and I'll go to the what's new and where you can go if you do need to find funding for that. But in addition, proposed activities must address one or both of the following secondary objectives. So either facilitate meaningful engagement between stakeholder groups with the intention of building effective relationships for future health research collaborations. So this means that you could also apply for Research Connections before starting research. You won't be able to use the Research Connections funds when it comes to grant writing or anything. But we do know that sometimes you need, in order to go forward with your research, you need to build collaborations with maybe a community, or there's a certain stakeholder group that you want to work with. So now what we're doing is offering that you can do some of that front work, as long as you're still following that primary objective of sharing health research knowledge. So there still needs to be an interaction going on. But now you don't have to wait till just end of grant KT. And then the other objective, if you're using this one or the both of them, is to facilitate the use and integration of health research knowledge and evidence into practice and decision making. So that's more of that traditional end of grant, you've come up with your results. Now you needed to get it out to the knowledge users or stakeholders. We do put in what we consider as a stakeholder group. So we have communities, people with lived experience, decision makers, health practitioners, healthcare administrators, researchers, educators, policymakers, patient groups, industry, and health charities. So as you can see, there's quite a few different examples, different groups that you can then identify in your Research Connections application. So with this program, like I said, we've been doing quite a few new things. So as you can see, the program objectives have changed a bit. As I just mentioned, we're now looking at not just at the end of grant, but also at that beginning when you're trying to build collaborations, but still sharing knowledge. So that means that we have changed the application type and it's activities only. So we no longer have the events in the traditional form. When it does come to activities, you may have an event component within that. That's fine. When we go to review it, we just want to see that there's a bit more than it just focusing on needing funding for a conference. I will discuss later on, but we have changed the grant amount. It's been lowered. So it'll be at $7,500 instead of the original $10,000. When it comes to multiple applications, it'll be one application per PI per call. So this year we're only doing one call, but in previous years and going forward, we may do more than one call in a year. So you could only apply once per call as the PI. This doesn't matter if you're a co-PI or a co-applicant. We've also updated the SHRF RMS. You may have seen that change already, or you may not. We're pretty excited and we're thinking once we've gotten through some of the growing pains and some little hiccups that this system will better serve our applicants and make it even easier than before to get through when it comes to from application to results and grant management. Please feel free though at any time when you're using that system to send us information. How's it going? We've tried to test it as much as possible, but there's always something that we may have forgotten. And we know you guys are really good at testing the system for us and coming up with things. So let us know if there's any issues that you come up with or any suggestions. And then finally, that does lead in to the application intake. So like I said, we're just going to have one call this year for the 2021-22. But then our hope is going into the future, into 2022-23, we'll be doing more open calls, and we've also started looking at doing some maybe focused calls as well around that, around this grant. The only other thing I forgot to mention when it came to the application type, so with events, SHRF does have a sponsorship fund, and we have information in the application package, but if you are looking for any kind of sponsorship for an event specifically, you can contact info@shrf.ca and they'll be able to direct you to the right individual. So going forward, the value is up to $7,500 that'll be available from SHRF. With this grant, as always, there is a required equivalent or greater matching amounts, and it can be in either cash contributions or a combination of cash and in-kind contributions. And we do have further information about what that combination looks like. But just to give you an example, so if you've requested $6,000 from this grant, then you'll need to make sure that you have confirmed $6,000 before starting the grant. And then what that is it's actually a total cost to complete the proposed activity would be $12,000. So that's an easy example where there's a lot of different variations of what can happen in between. And then for this one, because it's an activity now, the grant is provided, it's up to 1 year, so 12 months, with possibility for extension. So just going into eligibility of who can apply, this is an interesting grant for us in the sense that usually you have to be with an MOU, someone who has an organization that has a memorandum of understanding in order to apply for SHRF funding. But this one, you can also be part of a Saskatchewan organization that has an interest in health research and that can administer grant funding. So the rule there is you would need to be a CRA qualified donee We've had health charities apply to this grant before as principal applicant. We've had some different service groups also apply where they're working to get specific information and knowledge out to users. So that's the nice thing about this grant, is that it's a bit more open when it comes to the principal applicant eligibility. And co-applicants can be anyone that is going to have some sort of involvement with the grant. They can either be co-principal or co-applicants. You don't have to be a researcher. You could be a knowledge user. You could be a patient with lived experience. Really, it's just if you have interest in doing the Research Connections grant, and you have the specific, maybe a specific skill set or something like that. Also, with the new system too, you'll be able to have your trainees or research staff listed on the grant to show that you may have someone in place already, and you're able to have supporters. So that used to be our collaborators. Supporters can now be added to the grant as well. So just going into that eligibility, as I had mentioned, for principal investigators, they can submit one application per call. And then there's our usual principal applicant eligibility standards. Like I said, the biggest thing is you'd need to either be with one of our MOUs. You can still obviously apply, but then we have that added opening for those that have a health research interest and are CRA qualified donees. Then there's the application requirements. So we have the full overview in the program guide, but the highlights do include that the application would need to show that it clearly supports the Research Connections program purpose and objectives. So we would be looking to make sure that you're meeting that purpose, that first objective, and then one or both of the secondary objectives. We want to see that it's fostering dissemination and an exchange of health research knowledge in Saskatchewan. As a provincial funder, our focus is on Saskatchewan health. That doesn't mean that you could have people from outside of Saskatchewan that are interested. Obviously, especially when it comes to virtual, it can reach out to people just beyond Saskatchewan, and that's awesome and great. But we want the majority of the focus and the funding specifically would need to stay in Saskatchewan. We'd like to see that it's innovative, far-reaching, and impactful. All of our Research Connections applications should be based on legitimate and vetted research, and you'll need to show where that's coming from. It doesn't have to be coming straight out of a research grant, but it just needs to be something that is, as I just said, legitimate and it's been vetted, but it doesn't have to be directly connected to a previous grant you've had. Make sure you're identifying who those knowledge users are and their possible benefits that would be received from the Research Connections grant. So when you go out into a community and you have studied something specific, how is that going to actually help them? Not that you're just going in, sharing, and then leaving. We want to see that you're producing timely and concrete deliverables. So you'll give a timeline, how this will all happen within that 1 year of funding from the start date. And then we also would like to see where possible, this isn't a requirement, but it is something that SHRF is working on making sure we see in all of our grants, is that you're providing employment or training opportunities in Saskatchewan. Research Connections grants are a great opportunity when it comes to your trainees to kind of give them a bit more of a lead. And now with our new system, you can actually highlight who those trainees are and invite them to the grant. And then we get to also see how you're working on creating training opportunities through this grant. And then finally, if you can include an evaluation plan, it doesn't have to be anything too elaborate or crazy, but we just want to see, because you're going out and sharing this information, how will you then show us that it is timely and it was impactful, far-reaching? And the best way to do that is through an evaluation plan. So getting into the matching funding requirements. So as I said, there has to be 100%. Oh, there's a question. Can you pay for trainees from the grant that are also listed as co-investigators? So if they are listed in the applicant investigator section, then they cannot be paid. But if you list them in the trainee section, then they can be paid from the grant. So that is that give or take. If they would rather be listed on the grant as a co-investigator, no payment. Vice versa, if they are wanting to be paid, then they just go into that other section. No problem, Robin. So yeah, it must be 100% matching contributions. 50% minimum has to be in the form of cash. So, and then after that, it can be any kind of combination of in-kind or cash. It could be a 75-25, 60-40, whatever comes out to the best math, just making sure you have that minimum 50% of cash. So operating grant funding, startup funding, and similar sources are not eligible, but we do have an exception to this. If you had applied and were funded a operating grant, and in that grant it specifically said that you would be doing a certain knowledge mobilization activity, what I would ask is that we see that part of your funded application, and then we'd need to see the budget component that you have already put $5,000 towards this knowledge mobilization activity in your grant, and then that could be considered as your matching funding for the research connection. So if you do have any questions about this, you can contact me and we'll work through it. And that includes SHRF grants too. So if you had, say, a CID from SHRF and you had put in that you were going to do this activity and it fits with the research connections and you had money allocated to it within your CID grant, we can look at that as being a possible matching contribution. Something else too is SHRF funds may be conditionally awarded if matching contributions are not confirmed at the time of submission, but they do need to be confirmed in a timely manner, working with the SHRF program manager, so me, prior to the release of funds. And then SHRF funds will be reduced to confirm matching fund amount if if something falls through. The start date for this grant is May 1st, so we try to make sure that all matching contributions are confirmed before May 1st. But because results don't come out until the 22nd, that's sometime around there in April, we can discuss about the possibility that maybe the start date may not be May 1st specifically. Like you would still have a start date of May 1st, but the funds might not be released until June if you know that you won't know about your other contributions until the middle of May. We can be flexible, so just let me know and then we'll talk it through. So when it comes to allowable expenses, pretty straightforward. All expenses must be clearly justified in relation to the KMB initiative, and they have to cover only the direct costs. We do highly encourage to look for cost-efficient options where possible. Something that'll come up during the review is make sure if you have quotes in there, that's helpful because I'll usually ask for those. And then we like to see a breakdown of what those costs are, because if you were asking to do to build a website and that website cost was the full $7,500 you're asking from SHRF, we'd like to see a bit more of what's going on, whereas maybe it would be possible that they could offer some in-kind work, or if there's any way that we can make it more cost effective, maybe there's a trainee out there that would be able to do it for, a bit more of an efficient cost. We like to see that where possible. We do also understand that sometimes that's not an option, but just something to consider. For this grant, equipment is not normally an eligible expense. Usually it's just not going to be eligible unless it's something, if you come up with a really innovative idea and there's something specific that the equipment is needed and you can't get it from elsewhere, it may be considered, but again, contact me and we'll have discussions about it. And then just refer to the SHRF funding guide for important policies which apply to all SHRF programs. We recently updated that funding guide. And I'm hoping it's a bit more clear now that we've worked through everything about what is allowable when it comes to SHRF grants. So that's an important resource for you to read. So moving into the application and review process, the application process is done on the SHRF RMS, and the application form can be found on the home page under funding opportunities. We have how-to videos if you've never used the system before. So we've got something on how to register and create a profile. And then we have a video on just how to use the homepage and everything like that. But everything should be fairly straightforward, but we always know that sometimes things might be a little weird and you're using so many different systems. So if you have any questions, contact us. So yeah, when it comes to application support information, like I said, we have the YouTube how-to videos on our SHRF YouTube channel. If you go under the SHRF website and on the resource page, we'll usually have all of this information in there. The funding guide is important for when it comes to application. And we're still working on it, updating it as we go, but there's the RMS user manual. And if you like to read instead of watch and listen to videos, the user manual will have a step-by-step on how to apply for grants, and it has some of the screenshots and everything to go with it to hopefully make it as easy as possible. And then the review process is internally done through a SHRF review committee. So there's staff that's on this, and we review that based on a list of considerations that we have in the program guide. But really what it's doing is making sure that it is supporting that your application reflects what the purpose of the grant is, the objectives. Is it kind of within the realm of the research connections that you have knowledge users identified, the information will be useful, is it vetted? Pretty much everything that was in the last couple of slides is those types of considerations. But as I said, you can see that full list in the program guide. So getting into the important dates. So we did delay the competition launch a little bit. I know it was supposed to be last week, but it's today, and that's fine. And so the information webinar was also today. Thanks for coming. So the application deadline is April 1st, 2021 at 4:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you are with an MOU institution, do double check to make sure if there are any internal deadlines. Even though this is one of our more simpler grants, I do know that some institutions still like to go through the grant internally, which is awesome. And that way you'll get your required approvals. There is a signature page that still needs to be signed by your institutional office and the PI. For that signature page, if you are from a CRA donee organization, we just need to see the PI signature. You wouldn't need to do an institutional signature unless you do have that type of process. So funding decisions will be April 22nd, unless for some reason we need to delay it, but I don't see any reason, but I have no idea what April will look like. And then our funding start date is May 1st. But as I said too, if we are working with you on matching contributions, it may be a bit of a delay. So just last slide before ending it all, just some tips for applying. I think I say this every time: read the funding guide and the application package for full grant information. Those two packages together should help you out in understanding exactly what SHRF is looking for when it comes to the application process, what is eligible, what isn't. All of our definitions are in there. So the definition of a knowledge user, of a researcher, that information is all within the funding guide. And then anything that's specific to the program would be in the application package. I do suggest to start early. We do have an invitation process that you still need to do with this application. You don't need to do contribution forms if you know what those are from our previous ones. We still are keeping this grant fairly simple, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time for people to accept those invitations. So make sure that you get those out early, and then you can work on everything else when you want to before the deadline. Make sure to think through that budget and that it reflects your proposal. We do go through those pretty thoroughly, making sure that it fits with what we said for allowable expenses and that it fits with what you're doing. With this grant, we don't have a specific budget template. So go ahead and use whatever format you feel is best and easiest for you. Just make sure that it's really clear and showing me what's going on and how you plan on using the requested funds from SHRF. And then just be clear and precise on your activity and how it relates to Saskatchewan and the knowledge users. So pretty straightforward tips. That's it. It's a quick one today. If you have any questions about eligibility or program guidelines, you can contact me. Best thing to do is send me an email, and I'm happy to then set up a Teams meeting. I don't have the best access to my phone right now, but I will check that from time to time. And when it comes to anything technical with the SHRF RMS, Tanya is your go-to. She's our programs and peer review coordinator, and she's lovely and knows everything about the system that there is to know. And again, contact her by email and she'll get back to you as soon as possible. So I will stay on for a bit if there's any questions. Otherwise, the application is now open on the system and I'm excited to see what we're going to get. Thanks, everyone.